Welcome to the deep dive. You know, when you think back to World War I, the images are just, they're
Yeah.
unavoidable, right? You see the trenches, the mud, the machine guns, just this colossal scale of industrialized carnage. It's remembered as this grueling, bloody war of just pure brute force.
Exactly. And that standard historical picture is, I think, why the sources for this deep dive were so compelling. Because if we limit ourselves to that narrative, the one about heroism and trenches, we fundamentally misunderstand how the war was actually won. We've got a whole stack of sources arguing that the true decider of World War I wasn't the bravery of the troops or even the brilliance of a single general. It was something quieter,
Yeah.
a much more powerful force, the operational backbone that sustained the entire war.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's try to flip the standard narrative.
Yeah.
So instead of focusing on the battles themselves, we're going to dive into the logistical mechanisms,
Hmm.
the energy, the transport, the supply chains. Our mission here is to look at World War I through the lens of a massive, hungry industrial machine.
It's the essential shift in perspective. I mean, WWI was the first major conflict where you see machinery just devouring resources at this unprecedented scale. Oil became, quite literally, the lifeblood of that machine. And when you analyze war this way, the whole strategic question changes. You stop asking who had the greater will, and you start asking which empire collapsed because it ran out of fuel.
So it sounds like we're replacing the heart of the war story, which is courage, with the veins and arteries, with logistics. But doesn't that sort of downplay the human cost and the effort?
Not at all, no. It actually provides the crucial context for that effort. Courage is necessary, of course, but it's insufficient without the means to execute. I mean, try to imagine a major counterattack without the ability to rapidly resupply ammunition.
Or move troops even 10 miles quickly?
Exactly. No functional transport, no fuel, no intact rail lines. And what you're left with is a very brave army that is just, well, exhausted muscle. We're here to show you exactly how controlling that operational capacity determined who could keep fighting and who was ultimately forced to surrender.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The prevailing expectation in 1914 was, what, that the war would be over by Christmas?
A few weeks?
But instead, it stretches into years of this bloody industrial stalemate. So why? What allowed the conflict to become so prolonged beyond just, machine guns and trenches?
Well, the initial error was thinking about this conflict in 19th century terms. The leaders imagined this rapid war of maneuver fought by armies, groups of men, horses. What World War I quickly revealed was a fundamental shift. It became a war of industrial systems.
An army is a team, but a system. That's an ecosystem.
That's a perfect way to put it. And an ecosystem requires constant, massive inputs: coal, steel, food, and crucially, petroleum. And it all has to flow nonstop through this complex infrastructure.
So the ability to wage war was no longer limited by the number of soldiers you could recruit.
No.
It was limited by the maximum output of your factories and the capacity of your railroads to move all that stuff.
Exactly. The old rule was, who is the superior fighting force? The new rule was, who operates and sustains the entire industrial metabolism better? The ability to scale up production, to move millions of tons of material, from boots to artillery shells, that was the difference between winning and just total exhaustion.
And this is where the specific stories from our sources become so illuminating. We've got 4 key examples that really show how controlling that operational backbone defined the key outcomes.
Yeah, these are the moments where the quiet logic of logistics just overpowered what looked like, inevitable military might.
Let's start with a story most people have probably heard, but we're going to give it a new read through this logistics lens. The so-called Miracle of the Marne in 1914. This is the famous anecdote, right? Requisitioning 3,000 Paris taxis to rush troops to the front line as the Germans were about to take the capital.
Oh, it was a crisis of speed. The German plan, the Schlieffen plan, it all hinged on rapid maneuver. The French lines were buckling, and the railways that were supposed to bring reinforcements
Too slow.
either broken or just too slow to mobilize quickly enough. So a desperate commander makes this radical, completely non-traditional move. He activates the civilian fleet.
And what's fascinating here isn't just the improvisation, it's the sheer scale of it. This wasn't 100 cars. It was 3,000 individual vehicles, each one with its own engine, instantly repurposed for war.
And just think about the logistical challenge there for a second. You have to find 3,000 drivers, communicate the objective, organize the routes, make sure they have enough fuel for the round trip, and then coordinate the movement of thousands of troops. It's an exercise in complex operational management, not just battlefield command.
And there's that one detail that always stands out to me, the one that really connects to this idea of systems. The drivers, even as the fate of France is hanging in the balance, they're arguing with the officers over payment.
Hmm.
Were they being paid per kilometer or a fixed rate?
It's a small, perfect anecdote, isn't it? Even in the face of national annihilation, the human mind reverts to the logic of the system. Measurement, procedure, cost accounting, that systemic organizational capacity, that ability to rapidly calculate and mobilize the assets of a major city, that's what got those troops to the threatened sector just in time. A city was saved by operational efficiency, disguised as an armada of little civilian cars.
That is a phenomenal example of leverage. Okay, let's move on to the second nugget, the tank. When we think of the tank, we think of armor, of firepower. How does it fit into the logistics thesis?
Well, the tank, or what started as this highly secretive water carrier codename, it was the physical embodiment of the industrial system meeting a tactical problem. The problem was static trench warfare. And the solution wasn't just more muscle, it was mobile muscle, powered by gasoline.
And the sources really emphasize that its arrival on the battlefield was revolutionary.
It was. But think about what a tank actually required. This wasn't a prototype built in some guy's garage. It required a massive commitment of industrial capacity. You needed high-grade steel, specialized tracks, and most importantly, large, reliable internal combustion engines. And that instantly spiked the demand for high-octane petroleum.
A resource that had to be shipped, refined, and delivered right to the front lines where the railroads couldn't even go.
Right. So the tank didn't just break the trench deadlock. It became this rolling barometer of whose industrial and fuel infrastructure could support sustained mechanized warfare.
It was a resource hog.
A total resource hog. By late 1918, when you see these large mechanized pushes happening, it was a clear indication that the Allies, especially the British, backed by American oil, had achieved operational superiority. That ability to field and fuel and maintain thousands of these engines is what turned the war, leading to what became known as the Dark Day for the German army, when their lines were finally shattered by mobile firepower.
Okay, so let's look at the flip side. What happens when those operational arteries are cut or starved? Nugget number 3 details the effects of fuel scarcity on the home front.
Right, and this is where the supply chain argument moves from the military trench right into the civilian kitchen. When the oil supply started to dwindle, the war came home in this intensely personal way. Our sources highlight some pretty dramatic policies aimed at resource denial.
Like the UK banning recreational driving entirely, or the US instituting no gas Sundays.
Sure.
I mean, they sound like small sacrifices, but they reflect a profound systemic stress.
They do, and the consequences were massive. When the central industrial metabolism is restricted, the entire organism suffers. You can't just cut military supply, you have to restrict civilian use, which then affects public morale, transportation of food, the whole industrial workforce.
So a shortage of oil wasn't just grounding a few planes, it was forcing fleets to be restricted, slowing down the movement of goods and raw materials for the war effort.
And creating widespread public anxiety. Exactly. Modern war is unequivocally a war of the supply chain. And that chain flows straight into the economy, the community, and the collective willpower of the nation. The government's rationing efforts prove that the battlefield stretched from the North Sea trenches right back to the factory floor and the family driveway.
That sets up our fourth and most extreme nugget just beautifully, the brutal logic demonstrated in Romania.
This is where a nation had to make the ultimate strategic decision based entirely on logistics and denial. Romania was a critical source of oil for the Central Powers. As the nation was about to fall, a decision was made.
And the decision was to destroy their own national wealth. The sources describe this planned massive destruction of their own oil infrastructure. 70 refineries burned. It created this legendary sea of fire and black smoke covering the sun.
The scale of it was staggering. It was carried out by a British oil operative, a man named Colonel John Norton Griffiths. But the logic was brutally simple. If the enemy captures your infrastructure, that infrastructure immediately becomes the lifeblood sustaining their system, allowing them to continue the war.
That is a painful paradox. Sometimes to survive the war, you have to destroy the very assets that define your national wealth.
It prioritizes crippling the enemy's long-term capacity over preserving your own short-term economy. It's the ultimate high-stakes reality of industrial dependency.
Wow. Okay, so that is a phenomenal set of examples. We've looked at the taxi army, the tank, the rationing, the strategic burning in Romania. We need to synthesize this. What fundamental truths about systemic reality did World War I reveal that still apply today?
I think we can break down the so what of all this into three critical layers that really bridge the history of WWI with the challenges we all face today.
Okay, lead us through them. What are the three layers?
Layer one is what I call the operational bloodline rule. In the industrial age, and certainly today, power isn't just about static measures like territory or troop headcount. Power resides in the ability to flow resources: fuel, transport, logistics, industry.
Yeah.
And the simple, immutable truth is this: whoever controls the flow controls the heartbeat of the entire operational capacity.
So if you want to understand military power or even corporate dominance, you should focus less on the headquarters.
And more on the infrastructure carrying the resources to that headquarters. Precisely. The strategic center isn't the capital, it's the resource pipeline. Layer two is the illusion of speed and latency. People are always surprised by how long things take. They expected WWI to be a quick strike, a tactical sprint. But once that massive industrial ecosystem is activated, once factories are retooled and rail lines are committed, the conflict becomes a self-sustaining machine.
So they thought they were starting a skirmish, but they accidentally plugged into a generator that couldn't be turned off.
That's it exactly. The activation of that vast capacity inherently leads to prolongation because the machine just demands constant feeding. The latency in the system means that even after a tactical objective fails, the industrial system keeps pulling resources in, perpetuating the conflict until one system finally breaks.
Okay, and the final layer, layer three.
Idolizing the surface, ignoring the foundation. This is a human psychological tendency, right? We love the dramatic stories, the brave charge, the general's cunning plan, the famous victories. We focus on the surface, the final execution of the plan.
But the foundation of all that grand strategy is purely logistical. It's asking, is there enough operational capacity, enough energy and supply to even execute it?
You can have the most brilliant general and the bravest troops, but without that functional backbone, without the blood being pumped, that force is just muscle that can't move. The glory is on the surface, but the failure is always in the infrastructure.
That puts every historical victory and defeat in a completely new, grounded context. It all rests on thousands of unseen supply wagons and fuel depots.
It does. And this is the point where this deep dive moves from the trenches of WWI and connects directly to you, the listener, and the operational challenges in your own life.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We've established that controlling the operational backbone was the key to victory in WWI. How do we pull these systemic lessons and apply them to our modern goals, our careers, our personal performance?
The connection is direct because your personal life, your career, your goals, they are also systems reliant on flow and capacity. When a goal fails, people usually blame effort or talent, but rarely the system itself.
So what's the first personal takeaway?
Lesson one, analyze the bloodline, not just the goal. You have ambitious goals: success, wealth, mastering a skill. But you have to stop and ask, what is the operational backbone that feeds my system? Is my time protected? Is my mental energy restored after tough tasks? Is my environment set up to make discipline flow smoothly? If you're trying to achieve a huge goal without protecting your energy or time, your tank is just scrap metal, no matter how much willpower you pour into it.
So if my goal is to write a book, the bloodline isn't just the hours spent typing.
No.
It's the quality of my sleep, the clarity of my schedule, the absence of distractions.
Exactly. You are controlling the flow of high-quality mental energy. Which brings us to lesson two. Crisis survival is systemic adaptation. The general who saved Paris didn't win by applying 100% more courage. He won by finding systemic leverage, that massive unused taxi fleet. When you hit a crisis in your career or personal life, the person who survives and thrives is usually not the one who just pushes harder. It's the one who finds the non-obvious leverage point.
You mean looking for the systemic tool that's already there, but just misallocated?
Yes. Maybe the leverage is delegating one key task you hate. Maybe it's adopting a new tool that saves you hours of email. It's about a small logistical adjustment that solves a giant problem by adjusting the flow.
Okay, now let's tackle the uncomfortable one. Lesson three, the need for strategic burning. This links back to Romania.
It's the most brutal but necessary personal lesson. Just like Romania had to destroy valuable assets to deny the enemy, sometimes you have to proactively burn parts of your life that, if you keep them, will continuously fuel your failure. We're talking about toxic relationships, energy-draining side projects that don't fit your core mission, or even that subconscious need to prove yourself to every critic.
So you have to identify the asset you're currently valuing, but which is actually providing fuel to the things you are trying to defeat.
That's the pain of it. Keeping those assets sustains the very exhaustion or failure you're trying to escape. You need to deny the enemy, which is often your own bad habits, the resources it needs to fight back.
And finally, lesson 4, identifying today's oil. If WWI's logistical imperative was all about gasoline, steel, and machinery, what's the critical resource pipeline today?
Today, the scarce resources are less tangible, but they're just as critical to operational capacity. Today's oil is data, attention, mental energy, deep work capacity, and social trust. Whoever masters these flows, who ruthlessly protects their attention from digital distraction, and who manages their mental energy like a finite natural resource, that's who controls the modern game.
This shifts the entire battlefield for personal performance. So if victory in any endeavor comes from controlling the operational bloodline, we have to ask ourselves every day, where is the bloodline of my life flowing today? Is that flow directed toward what nourishes and sustains my goals, or is it secretly being drained by low-value demands and noise?
That is the core challenge. Realize that a lack of progress in your life is often not a character flaw. It's not a lack of effort. It is simply a lack of the right operational capacity. It's a logistical problem. Go and adjust your flow.